a TARDIS before?
The mid-credits scene from the church on Ruby Road showed us Mrs. Flood breaking the fourth wall and saying, "Never seen a TARDIS before?" Whilst this could just be a fun gag at the end of an episode, Russell has said that Mrs. Flood will return and her story will be a slow burn. This has got people questioning about who Mrs. Flood could actually be, so let's get into it and look at the top 4 choices that I've been seeing online, followed by who I personally think Mrs. Flood will end up being. Starting off with the one that I've seen the most, Mrs. Flood is simply a future Ruby or a relative of Ruby. This theory already has some validity to it. As Ruby is going off travelling with the Doctor, she could end up with an Amy and Rory situation where she gets stuck in the past. Not necessarily by the Weeping Angels, but something else could happen. The fact that by the end of the episode, Mrs. Flood was almost pushing Ruby to go in with the Doctor, it's almost like convincing yourself to go do something. The family theory side of it is that Mrs. Flood is actually a relative of Ruby, likely a relation to her mother, who abandoned her as a baby, and Mrs. Flood has become her neighbour to be a watchful eye over her. Another theory I've been seeing online is that it's Susan, the Doctor's granddaughter. While her fate is unknown, it's reasonable to assume that she could just suddenly reappear in the show at any time. The 10th Doctor did say in the past that he would be able to know as soon as he saw the Master, and when the 12th Doctor first met Missy, he didn't recognise her at all, and just seemed a bit confused by her. Perhaps this could just mean that if he's focusing on detecting a Time Lord, he can, but if he's not specifically looking for one, then he won't notice. It would make a lot of sense about why Mrs. Flood's attitude changed during the episode, and how she didn't know what the TARDIS was at first, but did by the end, unless Mrs. Flood used a chameleon arch at some point, and got her memories back. The third theory that I've seen online is that Mrs. Flood is the Rani. Instantly, this could be a little troublesome due to the difficulty the show has with getting the rights to the character. There are a lot of rumours out there who actually owns the rights to the character. Even Nicholas Briggs has responded to the matter in relation to one of his own projects, stating there could be complications with getting in touch with the estate. However, Ncuti has said in interviews that the Rani is one of the characters he would love to go up against in his run. There was also a scrapped line of dialogue in The Giggle during the Bi-Generation, where Mel and Donna are discussing the regeneration process, and Mel gives a brief recap of being unconscious during the 6th Doctor's regeneration into the 7th. Whilst this may have been scrapped as being too much in the way of regeneration scene, it could have also been scrapped due to issues with the rights. Finally, I've also been seeing a few people say that they believe this character could just be another River Song. However, as we more or less know all of River's backstory, before she became River Song, we know she was Amy and Rory's friend, later revealed to be daughter, Mel's, who from before this was always known to be a child in at least 2 incarnations. And prior to becoming River Song, she was associated with the Silence to take down the Doctor. This makes it a little difficult to figure out where Mrs. Flood would even fit into River's timeline. We also know that Mrs. Flood wouldn't be able to fit in after River Song, because the River Song incarnation is the last one before dying to save the 10th Doctor. Now, my theory is completely different. I honestly believe that the character of Mrs. Flood is very simply Mrs. Flood. My reasoning for this is partially what I've already mentioned. She doesn't know what the TARDIS is at the start of the episode, and due to the episode having time being rewritten in it from when the goblins went back and took Ruby as a child, erasing her from the present day, I feel like we have the same sort of situation going on with Mrs. Flood.
Timey-wimey stuff.
I think at some point in the future, we're going to see a younger version of Mrs. Flood. She's going to feature in an episode with the Doctor and Ruby. This will rewrite her future self to the point that by the end of the Christmas episode, she now knows what the TARDIS is, and she's encouraging Ruby to go inside because she knows Ruby was there when she met them when she was younger. The only flaw in this is that by the end of the episode, she claims to not fully know what the TARDIS or the Doctor is. But this could easily be explained as not wanting to give any details away of their future meeting. Like River used to say,
Spoilers.
Now, I'd love to hear if anyone else has any other theories on who Mrs. Flood could be, so let me know in the comments if you got any other ideas. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.